Welcome to Design to Thrive podcast. We have an amazing guest. His name is Kip from MedLoaner, and he's here to share with us his story and his business. Hi, Kip.
Hi, Enoch. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting and thank you for making that podcast with me.
Awesome. Let's get to it. So, how did the idea for MedLoaner come about?
Any good story about hopefully any successful startup in the future starts from a pivot. And then that's what exactly happened to MedLoaner. MedLoaner was not MedLoaner before, but was a software to recognize construction blueprints for a large-scale door and window manufacturer in Brooklyn, New York. So we built the software, but then the war in Ukraine unfortunately started, and the company had to shut down operations because they had a lot of manufacturing facilities under sanctions. And that's how the work stopped on the software itself. And the software was about 85% completion at that time. And I complained to a good friend of mine who happened to work for Johnson & Johnson. And he says, hey, there's a better application of this recognition software. And then he introduced me to surgical kits and surgical sets and supply chain of surgical instruments in the hospitals. That's how it all started.
Awesome. Now, was there a moment that led you to pursue this venture, like an aha moment?
Absolutely. The aha moment was pen and paper procedures. Everything in the MDRD stands for Medical Device Reprocessing Departments. It's known in Canada as MDRD. In the States, it's known as SPD, Sterile Processing Departments. Everything in those departments, pen and paper. Yes, there are beautiful machines, sterilizers, state of the art and things like that. But when it comes down to, counting those medical instruments, those components of those surgical kits, it's all manual. And because of those manual efforts, it's a lot of overhead. So when we started working with that, I couldn't believe that such an important area in the hospital is reliant on pen and paper procedures. So that was a huge aha moment. And we figured that, yes, that's probably a problem that requires to dive a little deeper. And that's how it's all.
Awesome. Can you share a surprising fact about the surgical inventory management that most people don't know?
Yeah. About 70% of surgical kits, surgical sets, get reprocessed unnecessary because of the issues with manual counting. So if there was something in place that would replace manual counting, it wouldn't be 70%. Perhaps it would be 5, 6, or 7, but certainly not 70%. So you can imagine how much overhead is added by reprocessing those sets unnecessarily.
Okay. And for those unfamiliar, how does MedLoaner streamline surgical inventory management?
What we do, we replace pen and paper processes with computer vision and AI. Computer vision is used to recognize the shapes of any surgical instrument, and then the AI is used to analyze inventory levels, the requirements in terms of various surgical kits portfolio for upcoming surgeries, and et cetera, et cetera. So we use both worlds. We use computer vision and AI. We combine them too, and then we help to optimize inventory management of surgical kits.
Awesome. Awesome. So can you walk us through the typical workflow of a hospital using your platform?
Absolutely. So the MDRD flow is as follows. 48 hours before a surgery, a surgical kit, which was ordered beforehand, is supposed to be delivered to the hospital. On the inbound, the technicians of MDRD, they check everything, according to PO. Hey, does the list of instruments matches with the PO? And if it matches, then the first step of MDRD procedure kicks in. The first step is washing. So they wash everything, take everything out, wash everything. They apply specific decontamination compounds. And then after that, it moves to sterilization. And whilst all instruments being sterilized at different stations, the technician have to wait. Once the wait time is over, once all the components are processed, then the technician needs to assemble that kit according to very specific instructions. And then once it's assembled, it needs to sit on a specific shelf to cool off. And then after that, it can be delivered to the OR. So in between those steps, there is a manual counting involved. So this is when a MedLoaner comes in. Instead of manual counting, You just take your phone out or iPad out or augmented reality glasses. It's an upcoming functionality. You put them on, or you take your app, you snap a picture, and the system guides you. Hey, it knows what surgical kit is that, what's supposed to be inside of that kit, and it guides you. It says pull out tray 1. You pull out tray 1, you snap a picture. It asks pull out tray 2. You pull out tray 2, you snap a picture. The images gets processed, and then the matching mechanism happens. And then the system knows if anything was left behind after that specific step. So decontamination, sterilization, assembly, cooling, and ultimately delivery into the OR.
Wow, that seems like a very complicated process.
It is. It is. It's to be honest with you, when I saw for the very first time when I went down to MGRD department, for myself, I named it the heart of the hospital. And then the speed, the pace with which MGRD technicians work, I call it the heartbeat of the hospital. Because if anything happens inside down that department, everything stops. Not a single surgery can be performed, even as simple as taking out stitches or something like that. So it all requires sterile instruments.
Okay. So what are the most common challenges hospitals face with surgical kits, and how does MedLoaner address them?
Misplacement of the components, and then one of the biggest problems is when registered nurse and surgeons, when they open up that kit and there is something is missing from that kit. So that's the biggest challenge. Now you have a domino effect, it does impact the next surgery, because now there is either a delay or cancellation. Both are bad. If it's canceled, obviously there are certain implications because of cancellations. And if it's delayed, there are, I would say, emotional implications on the patient. So now we don't deliver the high quality patient care as we're supposed to, but also that event impacts all subsequent surgeries. And there are only that number of hours in the OR. So that's a domino effect and like a snowball effect that creates a lot of challenges.
How does MedLoaner AI predict and optimize the inventory needs in real time?
We look at your historical data. So we rely on two different data types. One, it's a snapshot or a capture of a surgical kit and its content at a given time. That's a static representation of the set and so-called configuration of the set. And the second data type, we call it temporal or time series data. This is everything what was happening with the kit itself and with every single component of the kit. So now we are talking about revenue per instrument, profit per instrument, losses per instrument, and et cetera, et cetera. We can also calculate the instrument turnover and how much revenue does that turnover bring if we, let's say, bump it up a little bit, right? Like what kind of implications we can see down the road.
Okay. What future advancements in AI are you looking to incorporate into MedLoaner system?
Ultimately, we want to do precise forecasting, which will lead to lean inventory practices. Super important challenge because as of today, hospitals either overstock inventory or understock inventory. And overstock inventory happened for very obvious reasons. Like hospitals want to make sure that, like either scissors or clamps or scalpels, whatever it is available when they need it. And that because of that, they overstock because they do not look at the historical data of the instrument level data. I'm not talking about nominal, set ID. Yes, they do track that. They know exactly what's going on, but they do not know what's going on inside of that box. So this is when AI comes in, and eventually we want to enable lean inventory practices and assistance in, like all potential malpractice lawsuits.
So Kip, what strategies are you employing to scale MedLoaner's solutions globally?
We work with reputable accelerators, such as Innovation Factory, for example. Very interesting, very good organization, a lot of connections, a lot of high probability connections. And we are a portfolio company of Innovation Factory, which helped a lot to acquire the very first design customer that we've got. And it's a pretty well-known healthcare group outside of Toronto in Hamilton. They have 4 hospitals Healthcare Institute and med school as well. And then our collaboration with Innovation Factory led us to HHS. And at HHS, we were able to fully develop value proposition based on the insights from HHS. So I think we're going to continue on the same route. We are looking to engage with large multi-hospital healthcare groups, and perhaps also with smaller scale hospitals, primarily relied on private funds as opposed to government funds, because those are two slightly different business models that we want to touch upon.
And Kip, how do you envision the evolution of surgical inventory management in the next 5 years?
Everything is trackable, and due to temporal data of instrument usage, inventory usage, eventually we can create a pretty elaborate surgical kit library, I would say, with a lot of insights that you can utilize, and then that creating that library will help to stand up data economy, I would say. So let's say if you are a startup that wants to operate in medical device reprocessing space, you won't need in the future stretch your head and thinking how can you build that library, because that library will be available for you as an early stage startup or enterprise. The size of the company doesn't really matter. That library will be available for you, and then you can go ahead and then execute on your value proposition, as opposed to collecting data and waiting for 6-9 months until you collect the critical mass of the data.
Okay. And what's the most rewarding feedback you've received from a client using MedLoaner?
The most rewarding feedback is that the agents who work for large manufacturers such as Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Stryker, those are highly educated doctors, but because no one was there to perform that administrative job of manual counting, tremendous work efforts fell on the shoulders of agents. And this was the most prolific feedback that we received, because we had no idea that those doctors are not supposed to be that, are not supposed to do that admin job. What they're supposed to do instead is they're supposed to be in the surgery and assisting our staff, like telling them how to use it. Maybe perhaps that's the newest device that just came on the market, and they want to be there. They want to give very valuable insights that actually impact patient care directly, as opposed to indirectly through manual counting. So that was the huge revelation for us, and that's how we knew that we actually spotted a pretty serious problem.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. So what advice would you give to other startups aiming to integrate AI into healthcare solutions?
Well, you have to do not work inside of your little box. The advice that I would give is just go and first talk to as many people in the healthcare systems as possible. Depending on the type of your product that you're trying to build or you're releasing, you want to go and conduct as many interviews as possible. And to give you an idea from our own experience, we conducted about 50 interviews before we started even ideating the proof of concept. I'm not even talking about minimum viable product, even the ideation, like, hey, what are we actually supposed to build that will create value for those MDRD folks? So talk to your customers, get out of the building, as Steve Blank, a prominent professor from Stanford, always stresses. Build the minimum version of your product, the POC, the proof of concept, and go talk to your customers. And that's exactly what we did. We spoke to about 50 people in the industry, different players, different roles, different titles, different positions. And then once we got a good idea of what we want to build, we built very rudimentary prototype, and we started setting up meetings with the same people and saying, hey, is this what you actually want to see? Does it do what you needed to do? And et cetera, et cetera. So talk to customers. Voice of customers is very, very important. Also, don't forget about all internal relationships and dynamics within large healthcare groups. I'm not going to call them politics for what they are, but understanding those intricate relationships between different departments helps tremendously.
Okay. And lastly, how can interested parties learn more or get involved with MedLoaner?
Go on our website, reach out to us if you think that we can create value for you, if our network of AI agents that we built for surgical inventory processing can be helpful to you in any capacity. We would love to talk to you and see, what kind of adjacent markets we may uncover along with you as the design partner.
Now that brings a close to our episode with Design to Thrive. That was Kip from MedLoaner. Thank you, Kip.
Thank you so much, Mac. That was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. Do reach out. Thank you. Bye-bye.